spokesman says the IDF hit dozens in recent months. This is good news. This is good news that they want to celebrate.
And everyone is saying this is an indication that Kim Jong-un is serious about negotiating an end to his nuclear program and his illicit missile program as well.
Yeah.
So everything is tied together. But there is another big story at this hour that we're following, and that is the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran, playing out in a volatile exchange of missiles. Israel says Iran's Quds force fired more than 20 rockets from Syria, targeting army outposts on the Golan Heights.
It's the first time Israel has directly accused Iran of an attack, and it didn't take long for the Israeli military to retaliate. A spokesman says the IDF hit dozens of Iranian targets in Syria.
Okay, Ian Lee is live for us this hour in Jerusalem. Fred Pleichman is standing by in Tehran. But Ian, we'll start with you. What's the latest now on these Israeli airstrikes? Has it calmed? Is the situation calm now? But what will come in the next few hours and the next few days?
Yeah, John, as day breaks here, the situation does appear to be calm, very different than last night when residents of the Golan were sent scrambling to bomb shelters as the night sky lit up with that exchange of fire. Some of those targets hit, of the dozens, were Iranian intelligence sites, military sites, a base, Iranian base north of Damascus. They also hit that rocket launcher that sent those over 20 missiles at Israel. And they also targeted Syrian anti-aircraft batteries that shot at the Israeli missiles that were used. This created the most tense situation on that border in years, really. This according to the military. But Israel's military says they don't want to escalate this situation. We also heard from Russian President Vladimir Putin calling for calm on both sides, and he does. His voice does carry with both Iran and Israel, as both countries have good relations. Israel also saying that they coordinated their strikes with the Russians to make sure there wasn't any conflict there. Right now, though, this is a country that is tense and waiting to see what happens, although Israeli authorities want to give an air of everything is back to normal, business as usual, schools are open, and they're also telling farmers who work close to the border that they're allowed to go back to their fields.
Okay, Ian Lee, stay with us. Fred Pleichman, to you now. This is not the first time the Israeli military has gone after Iranian targets inside Syria. This has been going on for months, but this is the first time we've seen a military response like this from Iran. Many have noted it's the day after the U.S. president scrapped the nuclear deal, and that timing is significant.
The timing is absolutely significant, John. It's interesting, though, when you're here in Tehran, that there's been absolutely no reaction from the Iranians to this at all so far. There's one right on the Fars news agency simply acknowledging that there were Israeli airstrikes in Syria. It seems to indicate that they think those were just on Syria, not saying that those were Iranian targets at all. The Iranians not acknowledging that any of their positions were hit. The Iranians also, quite frankly, have never acknowledged what sort of military capabilities they have in and around that area. We've known that the Iranians have been operating in and around the Aleppo area. Of course, they were fighting the anti-Assad rebels in those places. But around the Damascus area, they do seem to have military capabilities south of Damascus, but then also north of Damascus, which is a highly militarized zone, also with the Syrian army there as well. But again, in this case, the Iranians have not come forward and said anything officially yet, which is not that unusual. If we look at some of the skirmishes that we've seen over the past couple of months, you're absolutely right to say that this is something that has been escalating and boiling, really, for the last couple of months. It has taken the Iranians usually a couple of hours, sometimes even a day, to acknowledge, first of all, that something like that took place, and then to come out with potential casualty numbers as well. You remember the time that the Iranians flew a drone into Israeli airspace, which then led to that other major Israeli response with those several Israeli jets taking out almost half of the Syrian anti-aircraft capabilities. It took the Iranians there also several hours to come out and acknowledge that one of their bases has been hit in retaliation, and that also Iranian soldiers had been killed in those skirmishes as well. So we're waiting to see what the response is going to be. So far there isn't any, but it is definitely highly significant that this comes just a day after the United States pulled out of the nuclear agreement, which of course led to fierce reactions by the Iranians, first and foremost by Iran's supreme leader ripping into U.S. President Trump, but then also other Iranian politicians coming forward, not just criticizing the United States, but of course also on the back of that, as usual, criticizing Israel as well, John.
Yeah, it's a double act, I guess. Fred, thank you. Fred Pleiken in Tehran and Ian Lee live for us in Jerusalem. We'd like to go back now to Joint Base Andrews, where we're still waiting for the U.S. president to arrive to greet these 3 detainees as they touch down.
We do begin this hour with breaking news. A spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces says more than 20 rockets were fired at Israel from Syria, believed to be fired by Iranian forces. This, of course, comes the day after President Trump announced the United States would leave the Iran nuclear deal. It was, to say the least, a controversial decision, with some of the concerns being that it could light a fuse in the Middle East. The hope tonight is that the fuse has not been lit. Our Oren Lieberman joins us now from the Golan Heights. Oren, describe what's happening right now. What are you learning?
Anderson, over the course of the last couple of hours here in the Golan Heights overlooking Syria here behind me, we have seen dozens of rockets fired from Syria into Israeli territory here. We've also seen some interceptions from Israel's Iron Dome aerial defense system. On top of that, we've seen Syrian anti-aircraft fire firing at what appears to be Israeli surface-to-surface missiles. On top of that, we've also heard what sounds like artillery fire from Israeli territory targeting Syria. It has been a very busy night, and all that is on top of what you pointed out. Shortly after midnight, local time, there was a report from the Israel Defense Forces that 20 rockets had been fired from Syria into Israel. So the Israeli military says they are responding. We've seen part of that response, but that response is expected to continue, and we expect more information on what that response was, who the target was, although, John, as you pointed out, Israel says it was the Quds Force, an elite division of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard stationed in Syria.
Do they have evidence of that, or what evidence, I should ask, Oren, that they have that it was the Quds Force?
So they haven't said specifically what intelligence leads them to believe that it was the Quds Force, that Iranian Revolutionary Guard force, firing the missiles. But we know yesterday the Israeli military had said they detected irregular Iranian activity in Syria. And we know that Israel has been expecting some sort of Iranian response over the last few weeks and perhaps even months. That's because there have been a number of strikes in Syria targeting Iranian positions that Syria and Iran have blamed on Israel. So Israel has very much expected a response. It appears that this may be at least part of that response. Israel has been on high alert. They've opened up bomb shelters throughout the Golan Heights here, although at this point, the Israeli military has not instructed people here to go into those shelters.
Oren, I'm not sure what freedom of movement you have right now, but have you had any information about casualties or damage?
So far, and this information is a few hours old, we're waiting for another update, but the Israeli military has said there is some damage here. It is light damage, and there has been no information on any casualties, whether injured or killed on this side. We have heard from the Syrian military, or rather Syrian state media. They say they've intercepted a number of Israeli missiles fired at Syria. So the information at this time is limited on both sides in terms of the damage that has been done, but we have seen very much firsthand the firing back and forth, whether it's rockets coming from Syria into Israel or artillery firing back the other way. John, it's worth pointing out that Israel and Iran have very much danced closer to each other, moved closer to each other towards direct confrontation over recent weeks and months. Given what we've seen tonight, this is at least part of that first direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, if it is indeed the Quds Force firing those rockets.
All right, Oren Lieberman of the Golan Heights. Oren, please stay safe. Joining me now is Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, John.
This is a development over just the last few hours right now, this increasing conflict in the region between, Iranian forces, it appears, and Israel as well. Do you believe that if it was the Quds Force, it was a direct response to the U.S. pulling out of the Iran deal?
Well, yeah, I mean, if the Quds Force got into Iran 2 days ago, then yes, but they've been there for a long time. Right. There have been 150,000 rockets that have been smuggled into Hezbollah territory. Iran has been building a land bridge in Syria, frankly, since before President Trump. So, no, this is Iran's attempt to continue to antagonize Israel. As they always say, they want to wipe Israel off the map. At some point, you have to take them seriously. And the Israelis, as we would if something was happening on our border, are taking them very seriously. I think they've taken measured responses, hit limited targets, but if in fact tonight there were 20 rockets fired from actual Iranian Quds Force and not Hezbollah is bad enough, but from actual Iranian direct command elements, this is a major escalation. I frankly would expect that the Israelis will begin clearing the decks of Israeli targets in Syria probably fairly soon.
One of the concerns about the United States pulling out of the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, when it did, is that, as we said, it would light a fuse in a region that is already so highly combustible now. Do you have concerns that it has shaken up this region even more?
No, I mean, again, this was announced a few days ago. Even if people suspected it, Iran didn't determine that they were going to get involved in Syria because we might pull out of the Iran deal. Frankly, they got the resources from the Iran deal to go into Syria. And so, yeah, I mean, people can disagree on the president's decision. I happen to think it was the right one because now he's kind of refilled the arrow quivers, the sanction quivers, to actually negotiate a deal that goes beyond the nuclear agreement and includes what they're doing in Syria. The Iranian regime, with the Russians and especially with Bashar al-Assad, are responsible for 500,000 dead Syrians, 50,000 of which are children, and they have a lot of blood on their hands.
One of the things Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary for the UK, has said is that he has seen no plan B by the administration. I know you have said you're supportive of the move, but you want to see a comprehensive strategy from the Trump administration to replace the Iran deal. Have you seen that comprehensive strategy?
Yeah, I've had discussions with State Department. Part of their initial part of the strategy is the process of reinstating sanctions. They're not snapping them back tomorrow. They're actually going to work with our allies to understand what investments they have in Iran that they need to begin to extricate themselves from, what these sanctions being reimposed are going to mean. And then the hope is we can compel Iran back to the table and say, look, let's get a deal, but that has to go beyond nuke. The only reason we're concerned about Iran's nukes is because of Iran's broader behavior. And so let's encapsulate the whole broader behavior. Look, America is a very powerful country. We sometimes underestimate the power that our economy and our leadership has. And while diplomacy is an art form, it's not a science. I think this is the right thing to begin to rein in Iran's broader behavior because, again, yeah, there may have been a temporary freeze on Iran's nuclear behavior, but look what they've done in Syria, and they're on the border of Israel today, and that's unacceptable.
Israel says they're launching missiles. The Quds Force launching missiles into the Golan Heights. You suggested that Israel might respond very forcibly over the next few days. What do you think the U.S. role should be over the next few days?
Well, I think we're going to back up our ally Israel. I don't necessarily think we're going to join them in the strikes, but I think we will make sure that we defend the territorial integrity of Israel. If Iran escalates, then I think the U.S. may be involved at that point. But look, you have to imagine if you lived in Israel and you had 150,000 Hezbollah rockets pointed at you, and the people in Hezbollah and Iran, their backers, have repeatedly said they want to wipe you off the map, you'd be ludicrous to not take that seriously. And I think the Prime Minister has taken very measured responses. And today, if Iran decided to fire 20 rockets into the Golan Heights, I expect that there's going to be massive retaliation, as there should be.
One more foreign policy question while I have you here tonight. Of course, these three Americans on the way home right now, the ones who had been detained in North Korea, they should land in the United States sometime in the next few hours. If you're North Korea and you're looking ahead to this summit between the presidents and you see what the United States did with the Iran deal, would you approach these negotiations differently? Would you have concerns or hesitate about putting your faith in the United States?
I would have concerns because I know the deal I struck would have to be ironclad and would lead to me never having nuclear weapons in North Korea. I actually think that us saying that this is a flawed deal sends a strong message to Kim Jong-un, who I think was scolded by his Chinese counterparts and compelled by American actions to say, you're not going to have nukes ever again. And so if he ever thought he could build a loophole with this president, I think he's going to be sorely mistaken. I think that's going to send that message.
All right, Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, thanks so much for being with us. I appreciate your time tonight.
You bet.
We're getting new information.